5 centuries ago, a man sat in exile, watching the tides of power shift like storms over Florence. He had served princes, negotiated with kings, and seen republics devour themselves from within. From his distance, he saw something that most still refuse to see today, that history does not move by ideals, but by instincts disguised as ideals. That behind every moral sermon stands a calculation, and behind every public virtue, a private ambition. He saw what many still fear to admit, that men are not moved by reason, but by necessity, and that the state, in all its sacred appearances, is nothing more than an organized response to the chaos of human desire. Today, the stage is no different. Only the costumes have changed. The court has become digital, the crown replaced by algorithms, and the mobs no longer gather in squares but in comment sections and feeds. Yet the same game continues: fear against loyalty, truth against narrative, control against the hunger for freedom. What Machiavelli saw in the palaces of Florence now plays out across nations, corporations, and empires of data. The prince still exists. He just no longer wears velvet robes. He wears a smile, a suit, and a signal. Machiavelli understood that power is never moral, only strategic. That to rule is to live inside contradiction, to be both loved and feared, both visible and invisible, both servant and master of appearances. He knew that mercy without discipline decays into weakness, and cruelty without purpose destroys itself. He knew that the ruler's greatest task is not to be good, but to appear good while wielding what is necessary. To lie when truth endangers the state, to betray when loyalty becomes a weapon in the enemy's hand, to pretend humility while holding absolute will. Our age, he would say, has perfected the theater but forgotten the plot. We speak endlessly of freedom, yet our lives are dictated by invisible powers that no one elected. We preach transparency, yet we hide behind screens. We talk of progress, yet we live under the same old fear, the fear of losing control. In this new empire of illusion, the prince is not a man, but a system, a self-regulating machine that rewards submission and punishes dissent. And the citizens, believing themselves free, are ruled not by force, but by the quiet addiction of convenience. He would see through the glitter of our democracies and know that consent has become the new chain, that outrage is the new distraction, and that the ruler who controls emotion now governs without armies. For in the digital age, Machiavelli's battlefield is the human mind. The fortress to capture is not a city, but attention. The weapon is not the sword, but narrative. The ruler no longer conquers territory, he conquers perception. He would recognize that fear still reigns as the most reliable instrument of order. But fear today does not come from the whip or the dungeon, it comes from the collapse of meaning, from losing one's place in a world too fast, too loud, too uncertain. The modern prince does not need to terrorize. He only needs to keep you uncertain of what is true. When nothing is certain, everything can be controlled. The wise ruler, Machiavelli wrote without writing, does not fight the nature of men, he uses it. He understands that the masses do not crave truth, they crave the comfort of conviction. They want leaders who reassure their illusions, not shatter them. They want heroes, not administrators. And so, politics becomes theater, and governance becomes spectacle. But he also knew that those who rule by spectacle eventually become its prisoners, for when power depends on illusion, the illusion must never crack, and yet it always does. We live in the aftermath of that crack. Our world is full of leaders who mistake attention for authority, visibility for virtue, popularity for legitimacy. They speak of unity while feeding division, promise stability while thriving on chaos. But Machiavelli would not be surprised. He would only smile, for he knew that men desire both order and drama, both safety and danger. And every ruler must learn to balance on that knife's edge, or be devoured by those who still can. The people are not cruel by nature. He would remind us they are forgetful. They forgive betrayal if it brings them bread. They cheer cruelty if it restores order. They hate corruption only when it fails to deliver comfort. Thus, the ruler's sin is not tyranny, but incompetence. To be feared is tolerable. To be ineffective is fatal. In this, Machiavelli saw what few dare to say aloud, that virtue in politics is measured not by morality, but by results. 500 years have passed, and still his ghost walks among us in the halls of power, in the boardrooms, in the coded architecture of our social order. Every politician quoting compassion while plotting advantage, every citizen pretending outrage while craving distraction, all are actors in the same ancient play. Machiavelli did not invent cynicism, he only gave it language. He did not glorify deceit, he simply refused to deny it. He would look upon our age and whisper that the same laws govern still, that fortune favors the prepared, that fear preserves order better than love, that reputation rules longer than armies, and that power, like fire, burns both the wielder and the world it touches. But he would also remind us that without fire, there is no light, without ambition, no civilization, without cunning, no survival. The question is not whether we play the game, but whether we know that we are playing. He would tell us to learn the anatomy of influence, to see through sentiment, to act with precision, to speak with restraint. He would tell us that freedom without discipline is chaos, and discipline without freedom is death. That to command others, one must first command oneself. That the ruler's solitude is not a curse, but the price of vision. That to lead is to be hated by those who do not understand the cost of stability. He would look upon our wars not of nations, but of narratives and say, "You have traded armies for algorithms, but the enemy is the same, the uncertainty." He would remind us that the most powerful rulers are not those who control weapons, but those who control what men believe about themselves. That the highest form of rule is not domination, but direction. The subtle art of steering chaos without being consumed by it. If he could speak now, he would not call for rebellion, he would call for clarity. For the courage to see the world as it is, not as we wish it to be. To understand that politics is not about perfection, but endurance. That the strong do not seek purity, but stability. That the wise ruler learns to navigate human nature, not to reform it. Machiavelli predicted our time not because he saw the future, but because he saw the pattern, the rhythm beneath all ages of man. He saw that every era builds illusions to disguise the same primal struggles. He saw that civilization is a thin veneer over appetite, and that power, however disguised, remains the only true currency. 500 years later, we still barter in that same coin. And so, if you wish to survive this age of noise, he would say, do not seek purity, seek understanding. Do not trust appearances, study motives. Do not follow the loud, follow the discipline. For in a world of manipulation, lucidity is power, and to see clearly, even if alone, is the beginning of sovereignty. For 500 years, his words have been misunderstood as cruelty. But cruelty was never his doctrine, necessity was. For to endure in a world of shifting loyalties, collapsing empires, and deceptive virtue, one must choose between the illusion of innocence and the mastery of survival. And in that choice lies the eternal struggle of power, the struggle that defines every ruler, every nation, every soul that dares to lead. Because in the end, Machiavelli's lesson is not about deceit or domination. It is about the courage to face the world without illusion, to lead without applause, to stand where necessity demands, even when morality trembles, to see, as he did, that behind every flag, every promise, every institution, there stands not an idea but a man. And that man must decide every day whether to rule his nature or be ruled by it. And that is why Machiavelli still speaks, not to the corrupt, not to the cruel, but to those who understand that power, in the hands of the wise, is the only thing that can hold back chaos. And yet, what he understood most clearly, what still unsettles us centuries later, is that every society rests upon a quiet agreement to pretend that leaders are virtuous, that citizens are informed, that justice is impartial, that truth can stand apart from power. But the mask, he would say, is not hypocrisy. It is the glue that keeps order intact. Without illusion, the public cannot believe. Without belief, the state cannot stand. The wise ruler, therefore, does not destroy illusion, he manages it. He lets the people dream, while ensuring those dreams serve the stability of the realm. For when men awaken too quickly, they do not see truth, they see chaos. And chaos, once unleashed, devours both tyrant and citizen alike. He would observe our democracies with the same calm detachment he once reserved for princes. He would note that elections are the modern tournaments of power, fought not with swords but with symbols, not with armies but with narratives. He would see that charisma has replaced competence, and that slogans have become laws, yet he would not despair. He would simply remark that the form of rule changes, but its essence endures. The ruler still governs by managing fear and hope. Only now, the theater is global, and the audience never sleeps. He would smile at the idea of equality as an eternal ideal, knowing that men do not truly seek equality. They seek advantage disguised as fairness. They do not want to share power. They want to feel that their subjugation has meaning. And so, the modern prince offers them participation, a vote, a voice, enough illusion to sustain obedience, but never enough to threaten the design. For true equality, he would remind us, is not stability but anarchy. And no ruler who understands human nature will ever willingly unmake the hierarchy that keeps him secure. To rule, therefore, is to balance deception and necessity with surgical precision. The prince who deceives too crudely invites rebellion. The one who acts too purely invites betrayal. Every act of leadership is a negotiation with fate. One must bend the wind without letting it shatter the mast. And Machiavelli, from his study, would whisper that fortune, that capricious goddess, favors not the strongest, but the most adaptive, the one who acts while others deliberate, the one who chooses when others hesitate. For in politics, hesitation is death disguised as caution. In our time, where morality has become a currency and virtue a brand, the ruler faces a paradox Machiavelli foresaw: the need to appear transparent while remaining unreadable, to share without revealing, to speak without confessing. For transparency, though celebrated, is fatal to power. A ruler too exposed loses mystique, and without mystique, he cannot command loyalty. Men follow shadows, not light. They crave something larger than themselves, something they cannot fully understand. And thus, the wise leader cultivates mystery not for vanity, but for survival. He would tell us that appearances, once dismissed as superficial, have become the new reality. That in the digital court, perception is not the echo of truth, it is the truth. That reputation, once a shield, is now the battlefield itself. He would see that the leader's greatest threat is no longer the assassin with a blade, but the narrative that turns the crowd against him overnight. And he would marvel at how swiftly fortunes now rise and fall, not through policy, but through perception. Still, he would not be surprised, for he understood that politics has always been a performance before it is an act of governance, that men judge not the substance of deeds, but the appearance of control, that the ruler who can appear confident in disaster is safer than the one who appears uncertain in peace. And in this, he would find our time to be nothing more than the perfection of his insight, a world where theater has become law and emotion the supreme authority. He would know, too, that fear has evolved. Once, it came from swords and gallows. Now it comes from exclusion, from the terror of being unseen, unheard, uncounted in the invisible court of public approval. The prince of today does not conquer by silencing voices. He conquers by overwhelming them, drowning every dissent in a flood of noise. The people, believing themselves free, exhaust their energy on outrage while the true decisions are made elsewhere, in rooms without windows, in networks without faces. Machiavelli would have admired this efficiency, for he knew that power thrives not by suppression, but by direction. To let men believe they are choosing freely while guiding their choices from afar, this, he would say, is mastery, not tyranny, but orchestration. A ruler who understands this plays not upon armies, but upon instincts. He makes loyalty feel voluntary, obedience feel noble, submission feel moral. And in doing so, he achieves the perfect order, a populace that policies itself. He would study our leaders and see that they fear not rebellion, but irrelevance. That in a world obsessed with visibility, invisibility is death. And so they perform, endlessly, devouring their own sincerity in exchange for applause. But the applause of the crowd, he would remind them, is the most fleeting of all currencies. It buys neither safety nor respect, only temporary illusion. The prince who rules by popularity dies by its withdrawal. He must therefore learn to govern the crowd's attention, as he once governed its obedience, not by seeking love, but by managing dependence. In this new world, he would say, the tools of control are subtle data, emotion, narrative, distraction, yet the principles are unchanged. He would see the hand of the same old fate guiding new machinery, the need for order, the hunger for dominance, the eternal trade between freedom and security. He would recognize that even now, every government, every corporation, every movement lives by his law to appear benevolent while pursuing control, to speak of unity while dividing for advantage, to promise reform while protecting the structure. He would not condemn this as evil. He would call it necessary, for he knew that power is not the corruption of virtue, but its precondition. Without power, virtue is a whisper in the wind. Without discipline, morality is theater without actors. The ruler who hesitates to act because of conscience will soon find himself replaced by one who has none. And thus, the burden of leadership is not purity, but endurance, to bear the weight of necessity without seeking absolution. If Machiavelli walked among us now, he would see his theories alive in every corner of our civilization, in the way markets rise and fall by rumor, in how nations wage war through narrative, in how the masses worship efficiency as the new god. He would see that the essence of his teaching, that the world is ruled not by ideals, but by forces, has only become truer. For in this age, power no longer resides in thrones or crowns, but in codes and connections. And, still, the same principles apply. The few govern the many, the cunning outlast the honest, and fortune still bends to the daring. He would not preach despair. He would preach clarity. To know this, he would say, is not to surrender to cynicism, but to awaken from naivety. To understand power is to be less deceived by its disguises, for the man who knows the game cannot be easily ruled by it. Knowledge of necessity is the first act of freedom, and so he would leave us with a warning, whispered through time, that every generation must choose whether to remain blind to the laws that govern it or to master them. For those who ignore the machinery of power are destined to be its gears. Those who see it, shape it, and those who shape it, rule the future. He would tell us that power, stripped of illusion, is neither good nor evil. It is the raw force of will that animates civilization. It builds cities and burns them. It creates peace and destroys it. It is the heartbeat of every empire and the shadow of every fall. And it waits, eternally, for those with the courage to wield it not in purity, but in understanding. For as he knew, those who fear necessity will always serve those who do not. And thus, 500 years later, we stand in the same theater, wearing new masks, speaking old lines. The play continues, the lights shift, the audience changes, but the script, the true script of power, remains Machiavelli's, written not in ink, but in instinct. The only difference now is that the curtain never falls. The curtain never falls because the play has become the world itself. Every man now acts upon the same stage where rulers once stood alone. Each gesture is recorded, every word remembered, every mistake amplified until it consumes reputations and reshapes destinies. The citizen has become the prince, and the prince has become the spectacle. The instruments of control have been democratized, yet the wisdom to use them has not. Everyone commands, and yet no one leads. Everyone performs, and yet no one governs. This is what he would call the tragedy of abundance, when power is multiplied beyond comprehension, yet discipline vanishes from the soul. He would watch our leaders scroll through their own reflections, entranced by the applause of invisible audiences, and he would see not arrogance but addiction. For the same desire that drove the prince to conquer now drives the populace to be seen. And when everyone seeks the throne of attention, no one tends the realm of consequence. Machiavelli would have warned that a society obsessed with visibility loses the very structure that sustains it. The spectacle devours the state, and the crowd becomes both ruler and mob. He would remind us that civilization rests not upon agreement, but upon hierarchy, upon the invisible discipline that keeps chaos at bay. Freedom, without restraint, decays into noise. Justice, without force, dissolves into negotiation. Even love, without order, becomes sentiment without endurance. Thus, he would say, the art of ruling begins not in the palace, but in the mind, in the governance of one's impulses, in the mastery of one's fear, in the refusal to worship one's own reflection. For the man who cannot rule himself cannot rule others, and the state becomes a mirror of its ruler's weaknesses. He would look at our age and see a world that has traded loyalty for transaction, honor for branding, and truth for opinion. But he would not call it decay, only transformation, for he knew that history is not a moral tale but a cycle of adaptations. Every age finds its own method of control, its own mask for necessity. When religion ruled, it sanctified obedience. When ideology ruled, it baptized violence as justice. Now technology rules, and it disguises domination as freedom. Yet the same ancient principle endures. He who controls belief controls behavior. The prince of today does not silence dissent, he predicts it. He studies it, anticipates it, and uses it as fuel. Outrage becomes data. Rebellion becomes engagement. Every act of defiance is measured, monetized, and folded back into the machinery it sought to destroy. Machiavelli would have called this the perfection of rule, when the subject's emotions sustain the very order they imagine resisting. No longer through fear, but through fascination. No longer by chains, but by choice. He would see that our modern rulers do not need to conquer territory. They need only to conquer tempo. Whoever controls the rhythm of events controls perception. Whoever dictates the pace dictates thought. The one who can slow down while others rush forward possesses the advantage. For speed is the enemy of reflection, and reflection is the enemy of control. The wise prince, therefore, knows when to delay, when to obscure, when to speak softly while the crowd scream. To govern in this age is to manage momentum, to let the world believe it moves freely while subtly steering its acceleration. He would laugh, perhaps quietly, at our obsession with morality in politics, not because he despised virtue, but because he knew its limits. A ruler cannot afford the purity of a philosopher, nor the sentiment of a poet. Virtue, untempered by necessity, is vanity disguised as conscience. And yet, he would insist, cruelty for its own sake is ruinous. He understood that men desire safety even more than freedom, and that the wise ruler gives them enough of both to preserve his power while maintaining their faith. To lead is not to uplift all, but to maintain balance among competing fears. Too much freedom and the strong devour the weak. Too much control and the weak destroy the strong. The ruler's burden is to walk between those extremes, knowing he will be condemned by both. He understood that men desire safety even more than freedom, and that the wise ruler gives them enough of both to preserve his power while maintaining their faith. To lead is not to uplift all, but to maintain balance among competing fears. Too much freedom and the strong devour the weak. Too much control and the weak destroy the strong. The ruler's burden is to walk between those extremes, knowing he will be condemned by both. He would warn that the new age's greatest danger is not tyranny, but the absence of authority. For when every man believes himself sovereign, no one accepts command. And when no one accepts command, the void is filled by chaos, and chaos, as he knew, always breeds a new form of tyranny. The crowd will summon its own ruler in desperation, and the circle will begin again. The lesson remains the same. Where order collapses, fear becomes the only language men understand. He would advise the modern prince to study silence as a weapon, to understand that restraint, in an age of noise, is power. The leader who speaks little, who lets uncertainty grow around him, commands more influence than the one who explains everything. For mystery breeds reverence, and explanation breeds contempt. The more the ruler defends himself, the weaker he appears. Better to let accusation rot in the air than to dignify it with defense. Power is not maintained by justification, but by endurance. He would find poetry in paradox, that the ruler must learn to disappear, to be truly seen, to yield in order to dominate, to act immorally in pursuit of moral ends. He would say that leadership is not a virtue, but a vocation of solitude, where one's companions are doubt and necessity. To stand at the summit of command is to dwell perpetually between trust and betrayal, admiration and fear, faith and deceit. Few can bear such isolation, and fewer still can do so without becoming monsters. Yet he would argue that it is not power that corrupts, but weakness. For the weak man who gains power becomes a tyrant to his own insecurity. He would walk through our corridors of power and whisper that every age thinks itself enlightened, yet every age repeats the same sins in subtler forms. The instruments change, the instincts remain. Men will always prefer illusion to truth, comfort to clarity, spectacle to structure, and the prince, if he is wise, must not resent this, but understand it. For to govern men, one must accept them as they are, not as one wishes them to be. The idealist rules for a season, the realist endures for generations. And so he would remind us that the ultimate lesson of power is not conquest, but comprehension, to know the nature of men, of fortune, of fate. To know that everything born from ambition will one day fall to decay, yet to act as if one's deeds were eternal. For that is the paradox of the ruler's soul. To build what he knows will crumble, to fight for order, knowing it will one day dissolve, to bear hatred in exchange for peace, to live not as a man among men, but as a necessity among illusions. And if he were to look upon our time one last time, he would say this: that though the world has changed, human nature has not. That the machinery of power has only grown more intricate, its illusions more refined, its masters more hidden, but the principles remain. Fortune favors the audacious, fear governs the masses, and the will to command defines all who dare to lead. For in every age, the world belongs to those who understand it, and those who do not are merely its subjects, believing themselves free while serving unseen masters. And so the voice of Machiavelli endures, not as the echo of cruelty, but as the whisper of lucidity. He calls not for despair, but for awakening. To see clearly is to rule inwardly. To rule inwardly is to survive outwardly. For the one who governs himself cannot be ruled by others, and in that truth, both prince and pauper find their last remaining sovereignty. He would point to the rise and fall of modern empires, not the kingdoms of marble and blood that once carved the world, but the empires of information, finance, and influence. He would say, look closely. Your kings are now corporations, your ministers are algorithms, and your armies are networks of persuasion. Power has changed its attire, but not its appetite. Where once rulers sought gold, now they seek data. Where once conquest required soldiers, now it requires stories. The balance between fear and respect is as delicate as the thread upon which the state hangs. A prince who governs by terror alone soon faces rebellion. One who governs by indulgence breeds contempt. The secret, he would say, is to act with decisive mercy, swift, calculated, never personal. Punish once, forgive strategically, and forget nothing. Machiavelli's realism was not cynicism. It was compassion without illusion. He did not hate mankind. He simply refused to worship it. The strongest rulers today, he would say, are not those who hold land or armies, but those who make others depend on them for meaning. Dependence, he would whisper, is the purest form of control. A ruler who can make a nation dependent on his technology, his culture, or his currency has conquered it without a single shot. For when the heart and the habit are captured, the walls are unnecessary. He would point to the spectacle of global politics summits where leaders smile for cameras while plotting each other's humiliation, and he would laugh quietly, for he understood that the performance of peace is itself a weapon. To appear cooperative while preparing domination is the oldest trick in statecraft. Every handshake hides a calculation. Every promise conceals a timeline. The wise ruler, he would say, never believes in permanent alliances, only in permanent interests. Loyalty among states is as stable as the wind. He would dissect the populist, the revolutionary, the savior figure that emerges whenever the people's hunger for certainty surpasses their tolerance for truth. He would see how charisma becomes currency when fear is widespread. The crowd, desperate for deliverance, crowns the loudest voice as prophet, not realizing that they have merely changed the mask of power, not its substance. The prince who understands this need does not argue with the people's illusions, he embodies them. He becomes the symbol they crave, the certainty they lack, the reflection of their hope. But once their hunger shifts, so too does their loyalty. The ruler who mistakes adoration for stability is already falling. He would turn to the world of business and say, "Here too lies the same architecture of power." The CEO is today's prince, surrounded by advisors, courtiers, and spies disguised as consultants. He must inspire loyalty while disguising fear, project vision while concealing doubt, strike ruthlessly when challenged, yet appear compassionate to the public eye. Every merger is a siege. Every negotiation is a campaign. And the boardroom, like the court of Florence, is filled with allies waiting for weakness to reveal itself. The wise ruler of commerce, like the prince of old, does not seek harmony, he seeks leverage. He would study the activists, the idealists, the voices crying for justice, and he would not mock them. He would understand them better than they understand themselves. For he knew that passion is the most potent resource of the ruler, easily ignited, easily redirected. The art of the new prince is not to silence opposition, but to absorb it, to let the rebels burn brightly in the direction he chooses, to give them slogans while he makes laws, to let them believe they are changing the world while he ensures the foundations remain intact. In this way, the ruler transforms dissent into fuel. He would warn us that the institutions we trust most, media, education, religion, are no longer guardians of truth, but instruments of influence, not by conspiracy, but by necessity. Each must serve power to survive. The journalist seeks access. The scholar seeks funding. The priest seeks followers. Each bends to the winds of authority while claiming independence. The wise ruler does not fight these forces, he feeds them. He gives each a taste of privilege, a whisper of importance, until they sing his tune willingly. Influence once purchased becomes belief, and belief once secured needs no chain. He would look upon the modern citizen, armed with endless information yet devoid of discernment, and see a paradox of freedom. The people are no longer ignorant, they are overwhelmed. Drowned in facts, they cannot see truth. Surrounded by choice, they lose the capacity for judgment. The ruler who understands this does not censor, he overwhelms. He floods the mind until exhaustion replaces curiosity. For a tired population is easier to govern than an angry one. He would point to the corporate state, where private interest and public policy merge seamlessly, and he would call it the inevitable evolution of power. For what is government but organization? And what is organization but control in disguise? He would see that the real princes of our age no longer wear crowns, but logos. They rule through convenience, through the subtle tyranny of comfort, and he would marvel at how willingly the people obey, so long as obedience feels effortless. He would use the example of a leader who rises through scandal, who is condemned in public, yet quietly admired in private. He would say, "This is no accident." For men despise hypocrisy, but they envy audacity. A leader who dares to do what others fear earns respect even from his enemies. The weak ruler fears being hated. The wise ruler fears being forgotten. Better to be infamous than irrelevant. Better to endure condemnation than vanish into mediocrity. He would see the manipulation of markets, the sudden crashes and recoveries, and recognize the same orchestration of fear and greed that once drove armies to battle. He would say, "Fortune has not changed her face. She has merely learned to hide behind numbers." The rulers of finance, like the princes of war, rule through uncertainty. They know that instability is profit and confusion is control. Those who can predict chaos can sell certainty at any price. He would study the machine of surveillance, the cameras, the data, the silent algorithms that watch without eyes, and he would call it the perfection of his own principle. To know all and reveal nothing, he would admire its precision, for he knew that information is the highest weapon, more reliable than steel, more enduring than gold. The ruler who knows his subjects better than they know themselves no longer fears rebellion. The rebellion has already been mapped, measured, and monetized. He would walk into a great city, a metropolis of glass and noise, and see the modern reflection of Florence. The same ambitions, the same envy, the same need to be seen, only multiplied by the machinery of visibility. He would say, "Look around. Your temples are now skyscrapers. Your preachers are influencers. Your coins are digital. But the prayer remains the same: power, prosperity, immortality. Men still worship at the altar of relevance. They still kneel before whoever can promise them significance." He would examine the rise of artificial intelligence and smile without surprise, for he knew that men have always sought to create servants who obey without question. The tragedy, he would say, is not that machines learn to think like men, but that men learn to think like machines, efficient, predictable, obedient to systems they do not understand. The prince who controls the machine will control the species, and the machine, unlike man, will never demand justice. He would turn to the young, restless, idealistic, burning with the illusion of autonomy, and he would say, "Beware of revolutions that feel easy. Beware of outrage that costs nothing. The rulers of your age will give you platforms to shout, as long as your shouts do not threaten their foundation. True rebellion is not loud, it is strategic. The wise insurgent studies the mechanisms of power before striking. The fool declares war before understanding who profits from his fury." Machiavelli would conclude that our time is not exceptional, it is merely efficient. We have not escaped his laws, we have mechanized them. The balance between fear and love, illusion and truth, order and chaos remains eternal. The only difference is the speed at which these forces now collide. And so, he would say, the prince of the future must be faster, colder, quieter. He must act through systems, not through words. He must know when to vanish, when to let fortune take credit, when to rule without appearing to rule. For the highest form of power, as it has always been, is invisibility. And in that quiet invisibility, Machiavelli would find his prophecy fulfilled that the rulers of tomorrow will not sit on thrones, but inside networks. They will not conquer with armies, but with influence. They will not command with decrees, but with design. And those who do not see this will live as citizens in a world they no longer understand, ruled not by men, but by the logic of necessity that Machiavelli saw long before we gave it a name. Machiavelli predicted our time because he understood that history is not a sequence of progress, but a recurring negotiation between order and ambition. He foresaw that every era would disguise its will to power behind new languages, religion, liberty, technology, justice, yet the same essence would pulse beneath them all. He knew that man, unchanged in his instincts, would continue to construct systems to protect himself from chaos, only to become enslaved by the very order he created. The genius of his vision lies not in prophecy, but in recognition. He saw that the machinery of power is cyclical, eternal, and indifferent to the illusions that men use to justify it. He understood that politics, stripped of its ornament, is the art of managing human contradiction, the conflict between what men desire and what the world allows. To rule, then, is not to create perfection, but to maintain equilibrium in an imperfect species. The ruler's task is not moral restoration, but strategic containment. For man is both noble and corrupt, rational and impulsive, brave and fearful. He builds nations in the morning and destroys them by night. The prince who cannot reconcile these contradictions becomes their victim. The one who understands them becomes their architect. Machiavelli saw that power must adapt to human instability. Laws, customs, institutions all must evolve, or they decay. Yet those who govern must remain colder than the times they inhabit. They must see through sentiment to the mechanics beneath it. When the world calls for justice, they must hear the struggle for dominance. When the people cry for freedom, they must detect the search for new masters. To govern wisely is not to echo the desires of the age, but to interpret them, to translate chaos into order without betraying the truth that order is temporary. He would have seen that the future belongs to those who command perception, for the realm of appearances has become the battlefield of our century, not a distraction, but the field upon which all power is tested. He would say that in such a world, truth itself is not what is, but what endures. The ruler's task is not to preserve the truth, but to preserve the structure through which truth can still be heard. Thus, the wise leader does not chase moral purity. He ensures continuity. He understands that a functioning lie is sometimes more useful to civilization than a destructive truth. Machiavelli's realism survives because it speaks to the unchanging core of human order, that stability is born not from consensus, but from controlled tension. The art of governance lies in balancing fear without descending into tyranny, and granting liberty without dissolving command. To rule well is to measure precisely how much truth a people can bear before they turn against it. The prince must know when to harden his hand and when to disappear behind symbols, when to rule through fear and when to rule through illusion. Power, to endure, must remain unseen in its necessity, yet omnipresent in its effect. He foresaw that the greatest danger to a civilization is not its enemies, but its own softness, the decay that begins when men mistake comfort for peace and sentiment for strength. He knew that the instincts of survival must never be fully tamed, or they will rot into complacency. The ruler's duty is not to deliver happiness, but to preserve vitality, to keep the people awake enough to work, proud enough to obey, and afraid enough to remember that power, once surrendered, is rarely regained. For the moment a society forgets that necessity governs all things, it drifts into ruin. He would remind us that fortune, though often called blind, rewards the mind that acts without hesitation. The wise ruler does not await destiny, he shapes it through audacity. He moves before the world can react, strikes before uncertainty becomes paralysis, and accepts that greatness demands solitude. For to govern is to stand apart from those who wish to be governed, to bear the hatred of those who benefit from your discipline, and to carry the burden of decision when others hide behind ideals. The prince who seeks to be loved will serve. The one who seeks to be understood will suffer. The one who accepts being feared may yet endure. Machiavelli's insight was that moral categories are tools of persuasion, not instruments of truth. To speak of good and evil in politics is to mistake the language of conscience for the language of consequence. He did not deny virtue, he repositioned it. Virtue, he would say, is not moral restraint, but effective action. It is the mastery of circumstance, the ability to read necessity and act in accordance with it. To be virtuous, therefore, is not to be kind, but to be lucid, to be strong, not cruel, to see the world as it is and still have the courage to act within it. He predicted our time because he understood that civilization's survival would always depend on those who can bear the burden of imperfection, those who understand that peace is not the absence of conflict, but its management, that justice is not the triumph of truth, but the equilibrium of interests, that freedom is not a gift, but a discipline. His realism endures because it speaks not to the illusions we crave, but to the structure that sustains them. The world he described of manipulation, fear, ambition, and illusion is not an indictment of humanity, but an anatomy of it. He knew that to curse power is to misunderstand its necessity, and to worship it is to misunderstand its cost. The ruler's wisdom lies between those extremes, in the acceptance that the world is governed not by purity, but by balance, that the highest form of leadership is not domination, but endurance. Machiavelli foresaw that the future would belong to those who learn to operate within this duality, neither cynics nor idealists, but strategists. He would say that the true prince of any age is not the loudest, but the most composed, the one who governs not by ideology, but by understanding the tides beneath it, the one who bends necessity into order without being consumed by it, the one who knows that power, like fate, cannot be tamed, only navigated. And thus, 500 years later, we find ourselves living in the very design he described: a world of appearances concealing necessity, of liberty masking control, of morality serving survival. His insight was not a prophecy of doom, but a mirror held to mankind's unchanging nature. For as long as men desire power, fear loss, and seek meaning through control, Machiavelli will remain our contemporary, the silent architect of the world we pretend to have outgrown, yet continue to build every day. Power, he would say, is not a possession but a motion. It must move, or it dies. The ruler who believes he can preserve it by stillness has already surrendered it. To govern is not to defend what exists, but to anticipate what is forming beneath it. Every structure of authority decays from within, and only those who sense its coming erosion can redirect it before collapse becomes visible. The wise prince reads the invisible, the murmurs of discontent, the fatigue of loyalty, the slow corrosion of belief. For revolutions are not born in violence, they are born in boredom. When people cease to believe in the necessity of their rulers, power begins to evaporate long before rebellion ignites. He would teach that the greatest weapon in rule is not force, but timing, the art of when to strike, when to yield, when to let events unfold until they become inevitable. A ruler who understands time commands destiny. He allows his enemies to exhaust themselves in their own momentum. He lets rivals burn through ambition until they expose their weakness. The strong man does not chase fortune, he stalks her silently, knowing she comes to those who prepare, not those who plead. He would remind us that politics, at its highest level, is not the pursuit of justice, but the administration of consequences. Every decision wounds someone. Every law is an act of exclusion. The ruler must accept this without guilt. He cannot seek to be loved for what he denies, nor hated for what he preserves. His duty is to the state, not to the sentiment of the hour. A ruler who apologizes for necessity weakens the very foundation of authority. Mercy, when perceived as hesitation, invites predators. To lead, therefore, is to live within paradox, to act ruthlessly for the sake of order, to preserve peace through calculated fear, to maintain loyalty through useful deception. The people do not require their rulers to be pure, they require them to be effective. A prince who feeds stability gives his subjects something greater than virtue, predictability. For the common man fears uncertainty more than oppression. He will endure almost anything if he can understand its pattern. The preservation of power, Machiavelli would argue, demands an inner detachment, a heart immune to the temptations of vanity and the poison of resentment. The ruler must see himself not as a man, but as an instrument of continuity. He must act at times against his own compassion, against his own pride, even against his own nature. For the prince serves not himself, but the structure that outlives him. To confuse personal morality with public duty is to invite disaster. The world cannot be governed by the conscience of one man, but by the equilibrium of necessity and restraint. He would caution that the ruler who believes his victories eternal is already blind. All triumphs carry within them the seed of their undoing. Success breeds arrogance, and arrogance blinds judgment. The wise ruler never celebrates conquest, he fortifies it. He does not trust applause, for applause conceals envy, and envy is the beginning of betrayal. The state is a living organism if it ceases to fear. It ceases to adapt. Fear, therefore, must never vanish entirely. It must linger just enough to sharpen vigilance. He would conclude that the mastery of power is not domination, but comprehension to see the nature of things as they are, unsoftened by hope or horror. The prince who achieves this clarity becomes unshakable, for he has ceased to expect the world to be just. He governs not to perfect mankind, but to prevent its collapse. His purpose is not to create virtue, but to restrain chaos long enough for civilization to breathe. Such a ruler may never be loved, but his reign will be remembered not for glory, but for endurance. For it is endurance, not triumph, that marks the true victory of those who rule. And so, in the end, Machiavelli would not offer comfort, only clarity. He would say that the fate of every age is decided not by its ideals, but by its understanding of necessity. The world belongs not to those who dream of what should be, but to those who master what is. Power, in all its cruelty and brilliance, remains the axis upon which history turns. To condemn it is to misunderstand it. To worship it is to be consumed by it. Machiavelli would have warned that a society obsessed with visibility loses the very structure that sustains it. The spectacle devours the state, and the crowd becomes both ruler and mob. He would remind us that civilization rests not upon agreement, but upon hierarchy, upon the invisible discipline that keeps chaos at bay. Freedom without restraint decays into noise. Justice, without force, dissolves into negotiation. Even love, without order, becomes sentiment without endurance. He knows that morality bends to survival, that loyalty shifts with advantage, and that appearance often outweighs substance. Yet in this cruel arithmetic, he also finds a strange kind of grace, the knowledge that clarity itself is a virtue. To see without illusion is to rule without fear. Machiavelli's message was never the celebration of deception, but the liberation from naivety. He did not teach rulers to be wicked. He taught them to be awake, for he knew that those who see the world only through virtue are devoured by those who see it through necessity. His wisdom endures because it belongs not to an era, but to a condition, the condition of power itself, which remains as ancient as the human heart. And if he could speak to us now, across the centuries of blood and ambition, he would say this, that the prince still walks among us not in palaces or parliaments, but in every soul that dares to take responsibility for the world it inhabits. The art of ruling begins in the mind that refuses delusion, in the heart that bears the loneliness of truth, in the will that acts when others hesitate. For the world will always bend toward the one who understands it. That, he would say, is the final law, that understanding is the last kingdom left unconquered, and those who master it rule not through cruelty or fear, but through the quiet authority of clarity. And in that, Machiavelli predicted not merely our time, but the timeless condition of man.